Ancient Faith Radio brings you another in the Great Tapes series. Once again today we have Father John Mack, an Antiochian Archdiocese priest from Kansas, who spoke in Dallas in February of 2002 on the subject of holiness in the 21st century. The conference was sponsored by North Texas Orthodox Missions, and copies are available from them at their website, ntom.org. That stands for North Texas Orthodox Missions, ntom.org. Tell them you heard Father John on Ancient Faith Radio. So here we go with part 2 of Holiness in the 21st Century, and Father John Mack.
There's a wonderful story of Elders Makari of Russia. You know it? Oh, good. I get to tell you one you don't know. Elders Makari of Russia, she had developed this to the point where people would come to her with tumors that you could see. And she would put her hand on the tumor, and you could see the tumor shrinking in the person and at the same time growing in her. And she would actually take their tumors onto herself. And we have this, many accounts that we know it isn't just like hyperbole. She actually did it. And then she would suffer with these terrible tumors for 3-4 months. And then through prayer, she would be healed and it would go away. But she would always take the suffering on. And the person would leave healed, of course, leaving her to suffer for 3 or 4 months as a result of their sickness. And you see the same thing in Elders Gavrilia, that she listened as if it was to herself. At the same time, she says, I think, if I, a human being, love them so much, how much more must God love them? In other words, God cares for them. He knows why they are sick. He knows what effect their sickness will have on their soul. He knows the reason of all things. I can neither judge nor fathom any further. What is she saying? You see, most of us, if we listen as if it's our own, then we begin to question God. Why do you let this person suffer so much? How can you let this go on? You see, we get distorted inside. We have no answer. We not only take their sickness, we take their frustration. And we end up as faithless as they. She listened, took their pain, but said, I know who God is. God loves. So I'm not going to question God. Whatever God lets happen, He does for a reason. She said, I then make a fervent prayer with all my love, and I place the person at the foot of Jesus. I say, Lord, give him your pardon, give him your mercy, give him light, give him health, make your will manifest itself in his life. And then I leave him at the foot of Jesus. It's a beautiful, she said, I became the transfer. I take it into me. But then I go and I leave it at the foot of Jesus. And then I go back and take someone else. And then I leave it at the foot of Jesus. You see this transfer, so she could always be joyful, never detached, but never deflated. Because everything was referred to Jesus. And she just left them at the foot of Jesus. It's a beautiful way. It's a beautiful way to listen. Everything was going fine. In 1954, her mother died. And Elders Gavrilia was incredibly devoted to her mother. And she talks about it as being the most difficult day of her life. Just the pain of her heart was she couldn't even put it into words later. She said, I died with my mother. I died with my mother. That night, she had an experience that forever changed her life. She says that at night, the whole room was filled with light. And it came out of an icon of Christ, that same icon that she would pray to every day, that it just filled the room with heavenly light. Of course, those of you who read, how many of you have read the life of Father Sophroni? Okay, you know that same light, the light of the transfiguration, the divine light. You see it. St. Silouan talks about it so much. The whole room was filled with light, and one word was spoken. And guess what? It was the name of a place. India. 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 She woke up. She didn't sleep much, she says. She finally fell asleep. She woke up and said, I guess I'm supposed to go to India. A Greek woman, like she's almost 50 at this point. She's 47. She decides she's going to go to India. She doesn't have any money. She doesn't know anybody in India. She just says, okay, God, I'm supposed to go to India. She said, of course, I don't know how to get there. I don't even know where it is, so you're going to have to, help me out here. And she stayed home. 3 days later, there's a knock on the door. There's an Indian on his way to India. And he says, I was just in England, and I met somebody. They said to look you up. I'm going to India. I just wanted to come and say hi. And she said, would you mind if I came along? And he said, yes. And she says later, she's giving her counsels, she said, that was the most definitive moment of my life. Because without thinking, he said yes. And she said, at that moment, I decided that I would always say yes when anyone asked me for anything. That I would never say no to anyone. But every person who asked me for anything, I would take that request as coming from the mouth of Jesus. And I would say yes. And as we'll see, it's her willingness to say yes. She said, I wouldn't think. If I would stop and think, it'd be impossible. You know? How was this man who had nothing going to take me to India? It makes no sense. Why would he travel, a young man, with a 47-year-old lady to India? He said yes. She said, I will always say yes. She went to India. 5 years. She's the Mother Teresa of the Orthodox Church. 5 years she labored among the lepers in India. She traveled to almost every part of India. She offered her services to her. She went there. I mean, it's just amazing to me. A 47-year-old lady, knows nobody there. She gets off the plane. People say, why are you here? And she says, because God told me to come. What are you going to do? I don't know. Whatever needs to be done. Show me somebody who needs somebody to love them. I came to love Indians. The Indians say that she was the only missionary they respected. Most of the foreign missionaries, when they would go to India, would bring along, the comforts of Western life. And they thought they were living very austere, to sleep on a mattress. Well, to an Indian, Indians never sleep on mattresses. Eldris Gavrilia got off the plane with nothing. And she lived just like the Indians. And she traveled. She would go from leper colony to leper colony, and she always took the opportunity to minister to the ones that no one else wanted to minister to. If you know anything about leprosy, the particular kind of leprosy, this is not biblical leprosy, you all know that. This is a different leprosy in the 20th century. Biblical leprosy was like a skin rash, probably skin cancer. This kind of leprosy is a nervous disorder whereby you can't feel. You lose the feeling in your hands and feet. And what happens with lepers is because they can't feel pain, they end up getting their feet cut off, and they end up chopping off their fingers, and they end up burning their arms, with something because they don't feel it. And what happens is then because they don't feel, they get terrible ulcers and terrible wounds that are filled with pus and that smell. And Eldris Gavrilia always took the ones who smelled the worst. The ones that you'd walk in the room, you'd want to throw up. She said, they're the ones that I want to minister to. And she ministered to them. And once again, we find she knew nothing. But love taught her, and she became, at the end of 5 years, the leading authority in the world on ministering to ulcers of lepers. So much so that doctors would come and watch her. And the first textbook that was ever written on treating the ulcers of lepers were simply her notes that somebody mimeographed. And it's amazing. You see this whole principle, love taught her. Because she loved, and she did not think it is impossible. You see, our brains get in the way of love. We have emotion of love, and our brains say, that's stupid. What is everybody going to think of you if you do that? How could you do that? You don't know nothing. You can't even do things at home. How are you going to help somebody else? Where are you going to find the money to do that? You know the way your brain sort of stops your love? If you do that, you have nothing left for yourself. How are you going to take care of yourself if you love that person, right? You know the way your brain. She didn't have a brain. She had love, and she acted on her love, and she was taught of God. And this is the principle. When you love, you are taught of God. When you think, you're taught by books. You know, when your brain gets in between love and another person, then you have to learn it from a book. But when you love, you're taught by God. Let me just share two stories with you that illustrate this faith and this love. One night, she's in her little room, which was really like a cell, and there's a knock on the door, and it's an Indian. And the Indian says, there's someone in a village 5 miles away that needs your attention. Of course, you don't travel at night in India. It's dangerous. You're supposed to say, no, I'll see him in the morning. Do you know why you don't travel at night in India? Tigers, they're everywhere, right? She said yes, because she said, I'm always going to say yes. She got in this ox cart as they're traveling. All of a sudden, they see 2 yellow lights right in the middle of the road. And they stop, and there is a huge tiger. And Eldris Gavrilia had no fear. The guy who's taking her is like dancing in his boots. She has no fear. And she looks at him, and she says, you know, if God wants you to eat me, then go ahead. But if God doesn't want you to eat me, then you need to move along, because I have to take care of someone in the village. He looked at her, almost as if he could hear her. And then he kept walking. And she said, I guess God doesn't want him to eat me. And she kept going. And you see that kind of faith and that kind of love and no fear. There's another funny story. When do I have to stop? 12? Okay. Forgive me if I'm going too late. There's another really cool story. This is my favorite. Of the many favorites I have in this book, this is my favorite. She had made a decision that she was not going to keep money. I told you that already. She was in the Himalayas ministering, and her family was concerned about her, that she had nothing. And so they sent her $100. She got $100. And she said, wow. She'd never seen that much money, not for a long time. And she said, nope, I'm going to send it back. Told God I was going to live dependent on him. I wasn't going to have any money. I'm not going to keep it. Then this other voice came and said, oh, come on. Come on. Keep 10 for yourself. Send the 90 back, but keep 10 for yourself. And she said, in my weakness, I said, okay. Sent 90 back, and I kept 10 for myself. Now, at this time, where she was living was invaded by bugs. She says, they climbed up my wooden bed, gave me no respite all night long. The weather was hot and damp, and my back was covered with a prickly heat inflammation. Caused me pain all night and day. So I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the nearest village with that $10. I'm going to buy a little DDT powder for the bugs, get a little talcum powder for my back, and I like marmalade. There's a constant theme. She loved marmalade. So she said, I'm going to buy just a little can of marmalade for myself. And so she takes off. She said, I haven't had anything sweet in a year. Certainly a little marmalade wouldn't be like a big sin or anything. I mean, come on, it's just a little. I won't buy a big one, I promise. Just a little one. So she goes to walk to the village. Along the way, she sees one of these Hindu gurus that she happened to be friends with. And she thought, he'd probably like some bananas. So I'll buy him a thing of bananas. She goes into town. She buys DDT powder. She buys talcum powder. She buys a little jar of marmalade and bananas. And she feels really good because she sent the 90 back. She starts walking back to the village. Along the way, she gets attacked by a crowd of monkeys. Come swinging out of the trees. They take the DDT powder. They take the marmalade. They take the talcum powder, and they leave her with the bananas. And after they're gone, she says, they eat bananas. What are they going to do with powder, poison, and a can they can't open? And then she thought, the bananas I had bought for someone else. But these things I had bought for myself. And it was God's way of showing me that when I act in love, I am protected. But when I act for myself, I'm on my own. That's a marvelous lesson that she learned. Would that we learned it. And that's why she had no fear. She stayed 5 years in India, and then came a new call of God. Up until this point, she is just a laywoman, okay? Very pious Orthodox Christian. When you read the book, you'll find that she kept a very intense rule of prayer. She was very Orthodox, but she was a layperson. She heard a call of God. This time it was to go to Jerusalem. And she ended up going, and she became a monastic on August 5th, 1959 in Bethany. And she lived there for 3 years as a monastic. She thought she was going to spend the rest of her life there. But such was not God's will. Patriarch Athenagoras was looking for a nun to send to France. There were some interfaith relationships, Taizé, or however you say that word, which had just opened up in France, and there was a little Orthodox part of that. And Patriarch Athenagoras was looking for a nun to send. And like Mother Gavrilia, when the request came, she said yes. And so she ended up going to France. It didn't work out. The Orthodox presence there just didn't work out. She was only there a short time, but she's in France. And to make a long story short, she begins to travel. She was invited to the United States. This is amazing. In 1960, she was invited to speak in Protestant churches on the Jesus Prayer and the Mother of God in 1960. This is long before we had like the evangelicals converting to Orthodox or anything. She's invited. She did a 10-week tour in 12 states where she talked to Protestants about the Jesus Prayer and the Mother of God. Just amazing in 1960. And everywhere she went, people said that they had never heard anything like it. In fact, one Protestant pastor came up afterwards and said, you're different. Everybody else speaks to us from their head. They have notes and they've carefully prepared it. You speak to us from your heart. And I've never heard anyone speak like you. Because she was authentic. And the one thing you know about Eldris Gavrilia is she was authentic. Whatever she said, she believed and she did. Most of us are fake. We say what we think others want to hear. Not necessarily what we believe. We say what we know we're supposed to say. Not necessarily what we do. And as a result, our words are empty. The only words which move another person's heart are words that come from the authenticity of your life. And if you're not living it, then you shouldn't be talking it. In fact, the fathers say that if you're talking about something that you're not doing, it's actually worse. The result of that will be people will do it less. Because it's a lie, and Satan is the father of lies. The fathers say that, those of you who have kids, that you shouldn't discipline your children for something that you yourself do. I always tell parents, you can only punish your children for something that God punishes you for. But if God responds to your disobedience with love, then you should respond to your children's disobedience with love. They say, but my kids would be so poorly behaved. I say, well, look at you. God loves you, and yet you're growing and changing, but you're changing from the inside out rather than the outside in. Most of our discipline makes children change from the out. All it makes is children deceptive. They're very good at not letting you know what they're doing, right? But we don't change their hearts. Most parenting is behavior modification. That's why most teenagers rebel, because they're too old to modify their behavior anymore. But parenting that's based on authentic love changes people. It means in the beginning they behave worse, but in the end they behave better because they're acting from the inside out rather than the outside in. Of course, that has to change the whole way we look at kids in church, and it's okay if kids misbehave in church and roll. Never forget the one time a little girl she got in the middle of the aisle, and when I was preaching, she just rolled back and forth, just like this the whole time. And her parents didn't know whether to get her because she would scream if they got her or let her. And I could see they're just like that halfway they start, no. So I said, it's okay, really. Her rolling in the aisle is more holy than my preaching about God. Because she's being real and authentic. It's okay. God loves her rolling more than he loves my prayers. So just relax, let her roll. It was very funny. It's like the other time I said, peace be to all, and this little girl really liked me, came running up, and she jumped in my arms. She came right up to Soleil. I said, peace be to all, and she came up and she said, hi! It was very funny. The choir didn't know what to do. It was very funny. Hi! Now you can sing, and to thy spirit. But she was authentic, and that's the point. She was authentic. She went many places in her life. She visited, some of you know anything about the movement of Orthodoxy in Africa and the thousands that were baptized in Zaire. Eldris Gavrilia was there. She was there. She was in the States. She went all over the place. Some of you have heard of Elder Amphiliochilios of Patmos, one of the holy elders. She was there. She was his spiritual child. She was all over Europe preaching and teaching, living the authentic life. Her biographer says, all of this traveling was always the result of invitations. She accepted every invitation with a spontaneous yes. As she used to say, the only prerequisites were a purpose in the service of God and the journey's fair, for she was but a moneyless nun and a wandering pilgrim of God's earth. Now, it's impossible to describe her travels because I get tired talking about them. You have to remember, she's 60 to 70 years old. She does that 10-week tour of America when she's 75 years old. She's not like a young, energetic woman, But God said, go, and she said, yes, and she went. Ultimately, in 1979, she retired to Athens, a small little apartment which became known as the House of the Angels, where thousands of people came to get her spiritual counsels. She removed herself to Aina to be close to St. Nectarius, whom she had a great love for. She just wanted to be close to her father, St. Nectarius. And then finally she came back to the mainland and died in 1992. Quite a life, huh? Quite a life. She was everywhere. What do we learn from it? What is the message of Eldris Gavrilia for us today? Let me just suggest a few things. Some of these I've mentioned already. Certainly the most important and the most powerful lesson that she has for us is the importance of accepting the will of God joyfully. As I said, we waste so much of our time trying to tell God what he's supposed to do with our lives, and fighting with God and arguing with God and arguing with other people. It's all wasted because, God is not prone to listen to the whining of his children. He doesn't fight back with us. He's like me with my daughter, and I do tell her to do some things. When she's whining about not going to bed, I let her whine. She's 5. I'm not going to argue with a 5-year-old. That'd be silly. And after she's done, I say, yes, but you still have to go to bed. And then she'll whine for another 5 minutes, and I'll say, I appreciate that. I understand that. I'm so sorry. You still have to go to bed. She'll whine for another 5 minutes, and I appreciate that. I'm so sorry. Yes, it breaks my heart. You're right. Life is not fair. Life is abysmally unfair. You're right. It's not fair that you were born last, and you're not as old as your 10-year-old brother who gets to stay up, but you still have to go to bed. Sure, that's fine. No, she goes to bed. She's in bed when I'm arguing with her. Let me read to you what Eldris Gavrilia said. She says, quite often patients with a painful arm come to me for treatment. The moment I start massaging the arm, the patient stiffens. And I say, relax, let your arm loose so that I can do my work. But he wouldn't, and he keeps his arm stiff. Then I tell him, in spite of all my goodwill, my experience and the love I have for my job and people, I can't help you unless you relax your arm. I can't massage an arm that is stiff. I have watched how the patient's attitude works and have realized that this also happens with us. If we abandon ourselves in God's hands, He will fashion us as He wants us to be. He will give us so many opportunities. He will make us meet people that are His own. We shall progress in life, and finally we shall flourish in Christ in God. But when we want things to be according to our own petty will and tell Him, no, I don't want that, then God says to us, let yourself free. No, I want it my way. Relax. Let yourself free. No, this is what I want. Because He made us free, God tells us, well, since this is your wish, go ahead and break your little head. Which was her constant statement. People would be rebellious. She'd go break your head. Bang your head, break it. And then you will come back and say, forgive me, Lord. Have mercy on me, Lord. Because we always end up saying, okay, this is stupid. Okay, God, whatever you want. But in the meantime, we've missed the blessing that God was bringing into our life through His providence. And I think that, is the message that Eldris Gavrilia brings to us, is relax. You lose that image of your arm, your arm hurts and God wants to massage it, but you make it stiff because it hurts. If you have pain, the first massage hurts. We do that with God. And Eldris Gavrilia says you have to relax. Accept what God has for you. It's not what you have for yourself. It's God's will when it is contrary to every single thing you ever wanted. Satan's very good at saying, sure, whatever you want. Jonah, when he got to the boat yard, there was a boat going in exactly the opposite way, and he went, ooh, God's will, the boat's here, but it wasn't. He should have realized if it was God's will, he'd had to wait for the boat. Because that's the way God works with us. Except, Eldris Gavrilia said, of course, this requires faith. We have to believe, A, that God is working, and B, that God is love. A, that God is working, and B, that God is love. And then we just joyfully accept whatever He allows to come into our life. And if we do, then she is the example of what happens to people who simply give themselves over to God. How many of you have visited 4 continents? How many of you have been invited to speak in hundreds of churches, Okay, how many of you have saved lepers? And how many of you written textbooks on physiotherapy? Okay, none of us have, right? Because we don't give ourselves over to God's will. You see the point? The second lesson of her life. How do we live? I think we live by accepting God's will. Like St. Nectarius, thy will be done. Thy will be done. If we could only mean what we say when we say the Lord's Prayer. Thy will be done. Okay, the second lesson we learn from her life is the path of salvation is guided by love for God and love for others. What am I supposed to do today? Love God and love whoever comes into your life. See each person who comes into your life as Jesus. Even, that guy driving the car who cuts you off. Instead of saying, what a jerk, say, Jesus just cut me off. You can't get mad at Jesus, okay? And then you would say, well, I guess he had somewhere important to go. if we viewed each person as sent to us by God, and our responsibility is to love them, as obnoxious and irritating as they are, what a difference we would make in the world. How many of you have found that the person that irritated you most at the beginning turns out to be someone you really wanted to get to know? Have you ever found that to be true? They're just like disgusting scum of the earth, and they turn out to be your best friend. You know, some of you are married to them, you know. But we don't learn, and we miss, beloved, the opportunities. Because we have, and this is the key, we have our own plans. If I stop and take care of this person, I'm not going to get done today what I think is important to get done. And we see everybody, this is the modern curse because we're all so busy. Everybody is an irritation sent by the demons to keep me from doing what needs to be done. Instead of seeing everyone as sent by God to allow me to do what God has called me to do. You know, our Palm Pilots with the to-do list, you know, can become a legalistic rule of things we have to do today. And we fight, and we get angry, and we get irritated, and we miss the joy of simply loving the person that God... You know, I often say when I have my list of things to do and I end up doing something completely different, I often say to myself, God wanted me to meet with this person instead of that person. I thought today I was supposed to do this. God wanted me to do this. You know, God wanted me to sit in traffic and be 15 minutes late. And I hate to be late because I'm a German. And if you're not there 15 minutes early, you're late. It's the German rule, you know. But God wanted me to be 15 minutes late. God wanted me to do this. God wanted me to spend my time with my whiny daughter, you know, instead of reading the book that I wanted to read. And all that matters is that I'm attentive to the person that God has brought into my life today. And if I am, God's going to take care of all the other things I need to get done. And you found this to be true. When you get over being irritated, you take care of what's in front of you, you still have time to do the things that you wanted to do. My kids are notorious at this. I'll give them homework, and they'll say, I don't have time. I have so much to do today. I can't do that. I have 50 hours of homework to do. I can't take the trash out. You know, and they'll spend 3 hours whining about the fact they don't have any time to do their homework. And then finally they realize that I'm more stubborn than they. They take the trash out, and then they get done their homework, and they have time to play Nintendo. And I have to go back, what happened to the 50 hours of homework? I did it fast, but we do that, right? And what happened to the 3 hours they wasted complaining about? We do that with God all of the time. And we lose the joy, the freedom of simply letting God drive the car. It's like my wife when I drive. She is so tense. She starts the car. She turns, and it doesn't change the way I drive at all. She can stop the car 1,000 times, and it never stops until I stop it. And I always tell her, just relax, sweetheart. Okay? Because if we're going to get in an accident, with or without you driving, we're going to get in an accident. Just relax and enjoy. You know? But she won't. She still keeps trying to drive from the passenger seat. And we're that way with God. He's driving the car that is my life. It's not my life, it's His. If He wants me to be nothing, that's His business, not mine. You see? If He wants me to accomplish things, that's great. If He doesn't, that's great. It's not my life, it's His. He created me. He brought me into this world. He knows what I'm supposed to do. It's His business, not mine. Remember this funny story of a man who used to worry all the time. Worry, 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 worry. Finally, one day, they see him all happy and without worries. Everybody goes, what happened? You used to worry all the time. He said, I met this guy. He said for $1,000 a week, he'd do all my worrying. And they go, wow, that's great. How are you going to pay him $1,000 a week? He said, I don't know. That's his worry. You see, when you have the freedom of realizing that it's God's life, you don't have to worry. And my dad used to tell me, good old Baptist German, so he had lots of sayings. He used to say, when I'd get all worried, he'd say, son, you're not important enough for God to ruin his reputation on. So stop worrying. Because God promised to take care of you. And you're not important enough for God to ruin his reputation on. And I remind myself of that when I'm most upset. You know, God's going to take care of us. And he always does. How many of you have been through things you thought were absolutely impossible? No way you could live. It was going to kill you, and you're still here. How come you don't remember that tomorrow when it happens again? You know? Why don't we learn? And that's what Elder Gavrilia, it's just the freedom. She did impossible things, but she never realized that they were impossible. You know? She was ruled by faith and love. And as a result, she had great joy. She had no ego, no concern for self. She wasn't busy. She didn't want books to be written about her, you know. She didn't start her life by saying, when I die, I want a 200-page book to be written about me. No ego. She just wanted to love God and love others, and there's a 200-page book written about her, you know. Some of us want lots of books written about us and probably won't be any, you know. We do much better just loving God, loving others. Let him take care of the book writing. She never thought of herself. She never thought of comfort or ease. She was always honest. She wasn't concerned with what others would think about her. Yet at the same time, she had an incredible sense of her own value and own worth because she knew she was loved by God. And I think that she stands, you know, as an instructress for us today. We're too busy planning, too busy thinking that we don't have time to love. And for all of our great plans and all of our great thoughts, there's a world out there that's dying with no love and no joy. There's a person today who's going to come into your life who needs you to give them the love of God. The tragedy is most of you are going to be too busy thinking about what you're going to do tonight to even see that person. And you're going to miss the opportunity to show God's love. Metropolitan Anthony Bloom always says we live in the next minute. Or always living, says that's the curse of being modern, is you're always living in the next minute. And as a result, you never live in what is called the existential now. And you plan all of your life and then you die. Welcome to America. Right? How many people enjoy today in America? And how many of them are obsessed with tomorrow? And then they die. And they never enjoyed today because of plans for tomorrow. One of the things I found about modern orthodoxy that drives me nuts, so you get to hear it, is that whenever we suggest anything, we always think of the reasons it can't happen. You ever notice that? I mean, really, I was an Episcopalian, I was a Baptist, but the Orthodox have them beat hands down for the reasons we can't do it. And I'm a planner. I love to think of like impossible things to do, and then I just go out and do them by God's grace. And I always have these people. My wife is the greatest example of this. She finally doesn't say anything anymore because she just smiles. But we are so very good at saying why it's not going to work. And then afterwards of sitting around talking about why it didn't work. You know, we say, well, there's only 60 people there. We have a community of 5,000, and there was only 60 people there. We go back, how was it? Oh, it was good, but just so few people came. And we wonder why, like, nobody's excited, you know? Can't understand why they don't get excited about these retreats. Nobody comes. I mean, think about it. That's our Orthodox, probably not as bad here in Dallas as other parts of the country. But I used to go home and say, there were 60 people there. Can you imagine? There could have been 2. There was 60. It was great. The next year you'll have 90. And then you can go back and say, there were 90. Can you imagine? Next year you'll have 120. But we think of the obstacles. Elder Paisius, you know about Elder Paisius? Some of you already. He used to say, it's a great example. I'll close with this. He says, we're such negative thinkers. He used to say, you take a machine that like produces chalices. Whatever you put into that machine, a chalice is going to come out. He said, you take another machine that produces bullets. Whatever you put in that machine, a bullet is going to come out. So you put gold into a chalice machine, you get a gold chalice. You put that same gold into a bullet machine, you get a gold bullet. He said, that's your mind. If you think positive, with faith and love, whatever comes into your life is going to come out positive. Might only be a clay chalice instead of a gold chalice, because you only get clay today. But it's still going to be a chalice. If you think negative, whatever comes into your mind, it could be great, is going to come out negative. You have a gold bullet. It says it all depends on whether we have faith. Elder Joseph, the cave dweller. You know about Elder Joseph, the cave dweller? Y'all need to read more. Okay? Where's the book lady? We need to read more. Elder Joseph, the cave dweller, I'm going to end with this, said, in the modern world, there's only one thing that Satan wants to do in your life. He wants to destroy your faith. Because if he destroys your faith, then he can get you to do anything. And he says, you need to know that the battle today is to believe in the goodness of God and the goodness of man. And those are both important. And the evil one is trying to strip you of your faith, because if he strips you of your faith, he strips you of your joy. And if he strips you of your joy, then there's no point in living. And as we'll see this afternoon with Father Alexander Schmemann, the greatest heresy is a joyless Christian. It's the greatest heresy is a Christian who has no joy. Mother Gavrilia had joy because she believed in God and she loved God and loved others through her.
And that was Father John Mack speaking at the North Texas Orthodox Missions Festival in February of 2002. The topic, Holiness in the 21st Century. That was part 2. There are several parts to go, so we would encourage you to stay tuned each day at this time to hear the next in the series. You can find out information about obtaining a copy of the lecture from North Texas Orthodox Missions at their website, ntom.org. That's ntom.org. Tell them you heard Father John on Ancient Faith Radio. Join us again next time for another in the Great Tapes series with Father John Mack speaking on Holiness in the 21st Century. Ancient Faith Radio, timeless Christianity 24 hours a day. AncientFaithRadio.com.